Welcome to Fireside Gaming. I'm Billum, and we are finally returning to FromSoftware's long-running mecha series with a look at Armored Core 2 on the PS2. After playing through and reviewing the first 3 Armored Core games on the PS1, I am finally back in home territory with this review. Armored Core 2 was my first AC game, though not the first one I owned. That was Last Raven. Instead, this was among the AC games that I played thanks to my hometown's local video store. I've been really looking forward to checking this game out again. Back when I played it as a kid, it wasn't a full playthrough on my own. Instead, me and a buddy rented it and rotated between playing and watching each other go through the game's missions and arena. I remember us getting a good ways into the story, though I'm not sure if we ever beat it, but I'm leaning toward no. What I do remember is climbing through the ranks of the arena until we took the top spot together. I'm not sure how we accomplished that whenever I think about how much trouble the game gave me this time around, but we can talk about that more in detail later. Instead, let's get into the story of Armored Core 2. If you haven't played the first 3 Armored Core games, then I'd advise doing so, or at least checking out my prior reviews to learn their stories. The events of those games matter quite a bit to the setting and story of AC2. Also, this video is going to be filled to the brim with spoilers for those 3 games and of course Armored Core 2. This is your spoiler warning, and I've got a timestamp on screen that you can skip to if you aren't ready to hear about the events of the game, but you still want to know about the gameplay and such. Armored Core 2 takes place 65 years after the events of Armored Core 1 and Armored Core Master of Arena. The actions of the 2 Ravens in those games resulted in the dismantling of Raven's Nest alongside the destruction of Chrome and Murakumo, the 2 major corporations ruling the humans underground. With this broke out a new war among the smaller corporations left behind. That event was named the Deep Earth War. This new war starts in ED-0158 and doesn't finish until ED-0187. The fighting was brought to an end when the Underground World Ceasefire Committee negotiated the Isaac Treaty. While this group was supposed to dissolve after the treaty was signed, it remains and becomes the New Earth government. It did so to oversee the emigration of humanity from underground back to the surface of the Earth. This is possible as the effects of the Great Destruction in ED-0106 have finally subsided, leaving the planet's surface somewhat habitable once more. Just a few years after this, Zeomatrix, one of the corporations that survived the Deep Earth War, discovers old plans for Murakumo for the terraforming of Mars. Prior to the Great Destruction, the company had sent unmanned drones and AI to Mars to terraform it. After sending a research team to the planet, Zeomatrix learns that it is now able to be inhabited once again, with an atmosphere similar to Earth's. This sees the company start to lay claim to the planet, with several other corporations following to secure their own stakes on Mars. This spread of corporate territories results in conflicts between the various companies, starting another era of battle. Seeing demand for mercenaries, Nerves Concord, the new home of Ravens following the destruction of Raven's Nest, sets up a branch on Mars. Not wanting to give up Mars to the corporations, the Earth government creates the large-scale Enterprises of the Central Committee, or LCC for short, on the planet. With Zeomatrix having pioneered the path to Mars, it is the strongest of the corporations. Close behind it is Emerald, the second largest corporation on Mars and the largest on Earth. Balena is another competitor on the planet and is third amongst the corporations, but it's nowhere close to being able to challenge Zeomatrix or Emerald. And finally, the LCC's attempt to exert the Earth government's influence on Mars is met with lackluster results, leaving it closer to a figurehead than a real power to be reckoned with. We enter this conflict in ED-0223, after some 30 to 40% of the Earth's population has immigrated to Mars. We are one of the new immigrants to the Red Planet, and our first order of business is becoming a Raven operating through Nerves Concord. We complete the entry test, allowing us to take on missions and participate in the arena. Now that we've become a Raven, Nerves Concord has set us up with an operator named Nell Alter. Her job is to provide us with support as a Raven. The first communication we receive from her ends with a heartening piece of advice.
Some birds can fly, and others cannot. This is the only truth in your existence. I pray you'll have the ability to fly.
With all of the major players on Mars seeking to hire Ravens, it's not long before we end up taking on missions from Zeomatrix, Emerald, and the LCC. Eventually, we are tasked with eliminating a group of disorder units. These mechanical creatures are native to Mars and have existed to it prior to any terraforming attempts. What they are exactly is unknown, but they can't be locked onto without a biosensor, implying that the insect-like enemies are made up of some type of organic matter. While that's definitely strange, the bigger concern is their tendency to attack human facilities. That has us taking them on quite a few times during our missions on Mars, and it's worth noting that the corporations have also been studying the disorder units to better understand them. We continue to take on jobs for the corporations, and the arms race between them heats up further. That is, until the Earth government finally grows tired of the ongoing battles on Mars. This sees it send the Frighteners, an elite unit of AC pilots to back up the LCC. This group is mostly made up of ex-Ravens, and leading them is Leos Klein, a master of the arena that carries with him the title of Ninebreaker for his defeat of Nineball. Klein never gave up his number 1 rank on Earth, and now he's supporting the LCC as it names itself the leader of Mars. This sees it order all corporations, and the Ravens working for them, to surrender to the government. With this order, the Frighteners start actively hunting down Ravens working for Zeomatrix and Emerald. Balena is immune to this, as it has sided with the LCC and is supplying the Frighteners with advanced AC parts. We aren't left out from this either, as the Frighteners come after us on several occasions while we take part in missions against both the LCC and Balena. Defeating members of the group causes Klein to take an interest in our abilities, saying that he looks forward to encountering us himself. While all of this is happening, we continue to make great strides through the arena. This sees us finally take on Ares and his Providence AC. He's another of the rare individuals that holds the title of Ninebreaker, not for defeating Nineball, but rather for reaching the top rank. And while Ares might think himself the god of Mars, he does fall to our skills, forfeiting the Ninebreaker title to us. The actions of the Frighteners eventually lead to the fall of Emerald as it gives up power to the LCC. Zeomatrix remains set against the Earth government and even goes so far as to split off from its Earth-based headquarters that wants to keep good ties with the ruling power. This sees Zeomatrix hire us for a mission to investigate Murakumo Dome, an abandoned facility from the first terraforming project. A person matching Leos Klein's description has been seen entering and leaving the facility. When we investigate, it seems that the place is abandoned. That is, until 2 Frighteners show up to ambush us. After taking out these 2, we are contacted by Zeomatrix's Earth division. We've been hired for a job against Zeomatrix's Mars division. Zeo Earth is worried that Zeo Mars will take drastic efforts to control the planet and defeat the LCC. This has us investigating troops being sent to an underground railway. Deep in these forgotten tunnels, we discover a massive disorder unit that Zeo Mars was intending to use in its plans. We defeat the giant enemy and return to Nerve's Concord. While at our home base, Nell sends us an email laying out the state of Zeo Mars and the dangers they present to the planet. Things are really heating up, so much so that our operator is even growing concerned about the path we're on. We continue to work alongside Zeo Earth to stop Zeo Mars, and this eventually leads to LCC declaring the unification of Mars under its banner. With that comes a change in leadership as the Earth government sends a new director to head the combined entity. Our job is to guard them at the airport while they arrive. This should be a simple mission. We are really only here for show, as the Frighteners are offering the main protection as the special unit of the LCC. But nothing ever seems to go as planned. During the mission, the Frighteners turn on the LCC, taking out its leaders and fleeing the area. That has the Earth government exerting direct control over Mars, while Klein sends a message to all Ravens, telling them that they have too many restrictions and that if they want to be truly free, they should follow him. The Earth government continues to contract us to fight off Klein and his Frighteners. We succeed in taking back several key locations from him, all while Nell is digging up more info about the usurper. It turns out Klein was a member of the Mars research team that investigated the planet. One of his papers notes that there should be a central control tower that would grant dominance of all disorder units to the one group that controls it. It looks like this is how he plans to take control of Mars, but Nell isn't convinced that's what the Ninebreaker is after. When the Earth government does finally track down Klein, they hire us to eliminate him. We agree and meet up with the Rogue Raven at the core of a Mars energy station named Rapture. We have to be careful in this fight due to the generators in the area, but we are successful in taking Klein down without doing too much damage. Or at least that's how it appears at first. It turns out this unit wasn't Klein at all, but rather a copy, a decoy. This fake Klein is completely unmanned and is piloted by an AI. With Klein having tricked the Earth government once more, he is free to make his way to Phobos, one of the moons orbiting Mars. Evidence points to the disorder control unit being located on it. The only reason it's never been investigated prior to this is the sheer number of disorder units on the satellite. However, Nell believes that the power Klein has gained from convincing Mars's Ravens to join him will allow him to get past the disorder units and reach the control device. As part of this plan, Klein and his Frighteners take over the STAI battleship. This is the most powerful weapon on Mars, one that the Earth government claims could destroy the entire planet. We fight our way through the Special Forces unit and confront Klein. Klein says that we remind him of a pilot he met once before, a rebel. But he's not worried, as he's already taken into account that an individual like us might appear when making his calculation, and that he won't let us interfere with his plans. After being defeated, Klein tells us that this isn't over yet. He says he is waiting on Phobos for us, claiming that this is where he will be reborn. When we return to Nerve's Concord, Nell confirms that Klein is already waiting on Phobos. She believes he's planning to take over the Mars Control Center for the Disorder units. Unfortunately, it's up to us to find out what that means for the future of the planet. Nell prays for our success, and it's time for one final confrontation with Leos Klein. But before we head off to Phobos, the Earth government has some new intel for us. It turns out Klein has contacted them and revealed that Phobos is actually a powerful weapon left behind by an ancient Martian civilization. To confirm this, the orbit of the moon has already shifted, and it appears that Klein intends to crash it onto Mars. The Earth government wants us to eliminate Klein, and says that if we are successful, it will grant the Ravens their freedom. After battling our way through the Disorder units on Phobos, we run into Ramil, the chief operator of the Frighteners. It turns out that Klein betrayed the organization, simply using them as pawns to achieve his real goal. Shortly after this, we encounter Klein himself. He's piloting a large Disorder unit, the Scarabaeus, and tells us of his true plans. He isn't seeking to create a world for Ravens, but rather to return things to the way they were before, claiming that humans need strict supervision and can't live on their own. The battle against Klein begins, and he is a force to be reckoned with inside this large Disorder unit. And while we do succeed in defeating the mechanical monster, the fight isn't over yet. From inside the Scarabaeus emerges the Filial, a smaller and quicker unit that turns out to be a much more serious threat to our mission. While the battle against this beast is hard fought, we do come out on top. Nell chimes in right after this, letting us know that Phobos has shifted orbit and is heading toward Mars. Klein, battered and beaten, but with a change of heart, tells us that we can still stop Phobos from falling on the planet if we destroy the Orbit Control Center. Taking his advice, we do just that. With Phobos deteriorating, Nell tells us that we'll never make it out in time. As we frantically search for our way off the moon, we get one final message from Klein, asking us, "What is it that you wish?" Our story finishes with one last message from Nell. She tells us that the Earth government has announced Leos Klein dead, and that his takeover of Mars has ended. The people see him as a failed revolutionary that tried to create his own government on Mars, but Nell doesn't believe that's what he was after. However, there's no way of knowing now that he's dead. Nell says that now Mars is heading into a new phase of history. She wants to know where we will go and what we will do now. And that is the story of Armored Core 2. Or at least, it's what appears to be the story on a casual observation. But I think there's a lot more going on here than just what we're told up front in AC2. Let's get the first thing that players need to know about out of the way. Leos Klein is strongly implied to be the protagonist from Master of Arena, the final first-generation Armored Core game and the one that released just before Armored Core 2. This is suggested by the fact that Leos Klein is a Ninebreaker, meaning that he defeated Nineball in the arena. We also know that Klein is roughly 90 years old and has lived this long thanks to the cybernetic enhancements granted to him as part of his Human Plus modifications. That means he's been around long enough to be the protagonist from MOA. This is also mentioned by Nell when she says that Klein used to operate as a Raven during the Raven's Nest era. Remember that Raven's Nest ceased to exist after the events of Armored Core 1 and Armored Core Master of Arena. Me bringing up Leos Klein as the MOA protagonist is something that's already fairly well known by fans of the Armored Core series, so that's not really anything all that shocking, I'm sure. But there's something else that I picked up on while looking over my footage for this review that I don't think I've really seen anybody talk about before. Something that the game never confirms outright, but I strongly believe is the conclusion that it tries to lead players to with the various hints throughout it. Leos Klein is Nineball. Now bear with me, as many Armored Core 2 fans likely just had one of three reactions to that sentence. You either think I'm stupid, stating the obvious, or maybe you're interested in why I think this. No matter the case, please hear me out. Throughout Armored Core 2, there are some signs that suggest Leos Klein isn't actually who he seems to be. Let's start with Klein's use of AI in our first battle with him. During this fight, we battle a version of Klein's AC that is red instead of blue and is piloted by an AI copy of him. It's also worth pointing out that this mission requires the player to traverse Rapture's core while destroying floating mines. These mines are set up by the Klein AC, as this is one of the extra parts it has equipped. These are the same events that the protagonist of Armored Core 1 goes through on their way to fight Nineball. And I'll also point out that Nineball's signature color is red, just like Klein's fake AC. This is an event that Klein would have no knowledge of, and this would all be coincidence if he isn't Nineball. The next time we see Klein, he yet again references events from the first generation of Armored Core games. He says our pilot reminds him of another he once knew, one he calls a rebel. I also have to mention that Leos mentioning a rebel is another callback to the first generation of Armored Core games. In those, if you went into enough debt, you would go into the Human Plus program. At this time, your character would lose their actual name and instead be renamed Rebel and then 3 numbers. This could be talking about the protagonist of Armored Core 1 or Master of Arena, who are different people as the games take place at roughly the same time. But it's also worth mentioning that Leo says, "I've already figured someone like you into my calculation." That comes across as a very mechanical and AI way of speaking compared to how Leos has conversed in the past. Also, when we defeat this Klein, there is no mention of it being an AI. On top of that, Klein says that Phobos is where he will be reborn. That seems to imply that we either just killed Klein, or that he might be reborn as something new. Yet again, the fact that he says he'll be reborn is what comes across as the most suspicious to me here. I also have to point out that this battle takes place on the STAI battleship. This is the ship Klein was using to travel to Phobos, so how is he waiting for us on the moon already? I think I have an answer to that question. Note that in our final confrontation with Klein, he pilots the Scarabaeus and the Filial. These are not ACs. They're disorder units, as confirmed in the Armored Core 10 Works Complete file. And as Nell told us earlier in the game, disorder units are unmanned, as in, they don't have pilots. So how is Klein inside one for the final battle? To understand how Klein is piloting the disorder units, we have to turn back the clock to Project Phantasma, the second Armored Core game to come out on the PS1. In that game's finale, Stinger, a rogue Raven, uploads his consciousness to Project Phantasma to meld man and machine into one ultimate weapon. It is my firm belief that Klein did the exact same thing with these disorder units. Now, how would Klein know to do that? Remember whenever I said that Klein was 90 years old earlier, and that he reached such an age thanks to his Human Plus enhancements? I believe those are key to understanding Klein's abilities throughout this game. Going back to the origins of Human Plus, they were originally believed to be pre-war technologies uncovered and developed by Murakuma Millennium. However, we learned late into Armored Core 1 that Human Plus is actually made by a guiding intelligence seeking to unify and protect humanity. There is a strong chance that this is referring to Nineball, or we have some really crazy connection to Armored Core 6 that was 26 years in the making. Take your pick. As for how that ties to Project Phantasma, the Doomsday Organization, the group behind the project, received their technology from Chrome. Chrome and Murakuma Millennium are the rival corporations fighting each other in Armored Core 1. However, the end of the game reveals that they are both controlled by Nineball as part of its efforts to steer the fate of humanity. I think it is completely reasonable to say that Nineball is directly involved in the development of both Human Plus and Project Phantasma. And to add to that, it seems more than reasonable to me that Klein was taken over by Nineball sometime after gaining his Human Plus upgrades. And part of what makes this clear to me is Klein's plans for Phobos and Mars. While the Earth government paints him as a revolutionary, Nell states multiple times that she doesn't think this is the case. Even Klein says, and I quote, "We humans need strict supervision. We cannot live on our own." That implies that something else other than a human was going to control Mars. And shortly after that he says, "All that I've wanted to do is revive the ways of old." What are these old ways? Humanity being led by an AI. I'll even go so far as to theorize that Klein was attempting to use Phobos to recreate the Great Destruction that forced humanity underground back on Earth. Doing so would revive the subterranean society that Nineball once ruled over. And despite all of this, Klein tells us how to alter the course of Phobos and stop it from crashing into Mars. I fully believe that this is the true Leos Klein trying to help the player, having briefly broken free from Nineball's control. I think we see something similar in Armored Core 1, where in one mission we have to hunt down an escaped Human Plus test subject, who, in his dying moments, tries to warn our Raven about the program not being quite what it seems. My final piece of evidence that supports Klein being Nineball comes from his final message to the player. After we destroy the Phobos Orbital Control Center, which looks incredibly similar to Nineball's main computer room at the end of AC1, Klein poses a question to us. Raven, what is it that you wish? That's almost an exact mirror of the "what is your wish" question that Nineball asked the Raven at the end of Armored Core 1. As I said earlier, Klein wouldn't know about the events of the mission Destroy Floating Mines. That was how the Armored Core 1 protagonist helped take down Nineball, not how Klein did. But Nineball would surely remember, especially since that's how the AI was actually defeated. Sure, Klein may have taken down Nineball Seraph, but that was just another AC under Nineball's control. The real blow to the AI came with the destruction of its central computer in Raven's Nest, and that's what the AC1 protagonist did. All of this points toward Klein being Nineball, and I really don't think it's that ridiculous of a jump in logic to make. This is a FromSoftware game after all. Not being upfront with the story and sprinkling in hints and clues to the real events is kind of their calling card. Now to be clear, I obviously can't 100% confirm that Leos Klein is taken over and used by Nineball during the events of Armored Core 2, but I think it's something that players should at least mull over while playing the game. It takes a lot of things that felt off for me during my playthrough and just made them click into place. But feel free to let me know your thoughts about this idea in the comments. With the story of Armored Core 2 now thoroughly covered, it is time to start talking about the gameplay. By and large, Armored Core 2 plays similar to the first generation of Armored Core games. That means there is a big focus on customizing the mecha and taking on missions to progress through the story. Doing so earns players money, which can be used to purchase more powerful weapons and parts for their AC. And just like the Gen 1 AC games, players can still end up going into debt if they don't perform well in their missions. I've said it before, but this is a mechanic that I really like as it forces the player to consider their options in combat, like favoring energy weapons since their ammo is free as compared to kinetic rounds. Also, FromSoftware had no desire to move away from tank controls for this game. That means analog support still isn't an option, and I'll stress again that this doesn't bother me in the least. I only bring it up because I know some people don't care for that control style. However, not everything is the same as the first generation of Armored Core games. With the move to the second generation came some changes that caught me off guard. For example, ACs are now considerably slower than their Gen 1 counterparts. Despite AC2 being my first Armored Core game, this bothered me a little since I've been playing through the games in release order. And while you might think that this slowness comes with increased defense to counteract the change, the opposite is true. Instead, ACs in this game are actually sporting lower defense than the ones in the PS1 Armored Core games. That's another change that took me a little bit to get used to. But neither of these changes are as important as the introduction of generator parts. These manage the heat of an AC, and having a better one can keep the mech from overheating in battle. Taking too much consecutive damage or getting attacked by a heat-based weapon causes the mech's temperature to increase. Once the heat gauge fills, the generator will slowly exhaust the heat. During this time, the AC takes continuous damage. Ongoing attacks from enemies can also keep building heat, making this a frighteningly efficient way to beat enemies. In fact, I spent a good few of my first missions and arena battles adjusting to this extra layer of combat. I also found the arena to be really difficult near the last third, I would say. I started running into a lot of trouble and had to go back to like the classic Cheez-It with like tank tread legs and strong laser weapons or grenade launchers and stuff. Not that I've not done that in the prior AC games before this, but I didn't have to rely on it near as much as I felt like I had to in AC2. That was just something I wanted to note because, man, that was a problem for me. But I'll get back on script now. Other new parts that are introduced in Armored Core 2 include inside and extension pieces. Inside parts offer additional variety to builds, such as adding decoys for incoming missiles, laying bombs, or disrupting the lock-on abilities of enemy ACs. As for extension parts, they cover some similar areas as inside parts. That includes the best type of protection, missile interceptors. These automatically shoot down incoming missiles and are a great boon when fighting other ACs in the arena. There are also quick boost options that can give players the movement they need to dodge attacks. Speaking of movement, I should also mention that Armored Core 2 does introduce the overboost mechanic to the series. This essentially allows the AC to charge up its booster for a powerful dash that can cover a good bit of ground in a short period of time. It can be a bit hard to get the hang of, and I didn't use it too often, but it's a good option for those willing to master it. The final major change to ACs in this game is called Limiter Release, and it does exactly what it sounds like it does. When activating this, the AC gains unlimited energy for a short period of time. This allows the player to go all out with their booster. Pair it with energy-based weapons, and it is a truly devastating ability. Just note that after the limiter release is complete, the AC will have no energy for an extended period of time. If you're going to use this, make sure you have the ability to win the fight you're in. Otherwise, you will be quickly dispatched afterwards. Moving on to the graphics, there are some obvious upgrades in Armored Core 2. That makes sense considering the first 3 Armored Core games came out on the PS1 and AC2 is a PS2 game. The graphics look good with there being some extra details given to certain weapons and such, like some of the radars actually spinning during missions and little things like that. There's also a lot less fog in AC2 as compared to the Gen 1 AC games. But that does come with some disadvantages. While it's true that players can see further, and that's great for combat, I also noticed some bad cases of slowdown in AC2, which is something I've never really dealt with in the PS1 Armored Core games. And do note that I'm playing AC2 via a disc and on my PS2, so this isn't a case of running into problems by playing through emulation. Trust me, for all the times I had to retry the final mission after dying to that last boss, I almost wish I had booted up PCSX2 for this game. And of course, I can't talk about an Armored Core game without bringing up its music. The game features loads of techno and electronic songs, as well as some that feel more experimental in nature. It makes for a great soundtrack that gives the game its own identity separate from the PS1 games. Magnetism, Lynch Law, and King Lear are some of my favorite tracks in this game, and Beatmask is one that I could really do without. I'll also mention that Armored Core 2 expands on the voice acting in the series with all of the missions and several cutscenes in the game featuring it. The results are a bit mixed, with some of the performances sounding alright,
Emerald forces have crossed the Arden River and are closing in on our lab,
while others just don't quite do it for me.
We're planning an assault on the Zeomatrix AC Research Lab, located on the Arden River.
Overall, I had a lot of fun with Armored Core 2. Playing it for the first time since my teenage years was a great experience, and one that I'm sure I will go through again. The one thing that did really surprise me is the changes from the Gen 1 AC games that I didn't really know about since I started with Gen 2. Now that I've played those first generation Armored Core games and can compare them to the second, or at least the first game in the second generation, I think I actually prefer Gen 1. I wasn't really expecting that going into this, as I figured returning to my first AC game would have me preferring it, but this outcome isn't a bad one. Anyone looking to play Armored Core 2 has to stick to the original release for the PS2. It's one of the cheaper AC games to purchase at $35 complete, which is crazy when I consider the fact I picked it up for around $12 just a few years ago. Prices on AC games have already jumped once during the lockdowns, and then they did so after the announcement of Armored Core 6. They also haven't really come down much since then. It's a really sucky situation since it's such a great series, and it's hard to get into due to the extreme price barrier. Considering there's no real way to buy the games in a way that benefits Fromsoft, I can't blame anyone for going other routes. When next we return to Armored Core, it will be with a retrospective of Armored Core 2: Another Age. It's the final second-gen Armored Core game, and the final entry in the original AC timeline, depending on who you ask. Thanks for watching my retrospective of Armored Core 2, and until next time, take it easy.